Now, our mission at On Purpose is actually not so much to develop people. Our mission primarily is actually to try and transform and help transform the economy. But we have a strong view that we believe the best way to try and do that is to develop people who will go out and spark some of that transformation. And we have been doing this for nearly 16 years now across the three major economies in Europe, in London, Paris, and Berlin. And almost, or not almost, more than 1,000 people have now been through our program, which is a 1 year full-time exercise. So we've just through the program created, I guess, 1,000 years at least of learning. And then, of course, many years beyond that for the people who have been working beyond the program as well. And I'd like to share a little bit of the learnings we have made over these 16 years with you today and see whether that can spark an interesting conversation. It all began in 2007, really, with a conversation with this lady. This is Christine Lloyd, a wise lady who I met. She had had a career being very senior, both in the corporate world, in the business world, and also in the charity world. And we were having a kind of very enthusiastic conversation about the need for more people who were, as we call them, bilingual, who could speak, if you like, both social and commercial or environmental and commercial languages. And she basically planted the seed of the idea for On Purpose with me. She said, well, you, Tom, should create the leadership program for this new emerging space that is trying to integrate these different ways of working in a more holistic, more intelligent way. Now, at the time I was leaving McKinsey, and I actually went off and worked in a couple of other organizations, social enterprises, social businesses for a couple of years. But the idea that Christine had given me wouldn't go away. Christine actually, a few years later, became a board member of ours, which was wonderful. But because this idea wouldn't go away, was I think in the Christmas holidays of 2008 that I sat down and I wrote a business plan. And in true management consulting style, I think this had over 100 PowerPoint pages. It was very detailed. But it was useful to go and have lots and lots of conversations with people over the next year before eventually launching On Purpose at the end of 2009. And that business plan already included in it, I would say, three very fundamental beliefs that we still adhere to today. And I think it's worth making those explicit. The first is the most important. That is, if you find great people and you provide them with support, learning, and a community, then they will go on to make great things happen. Things that we can't even anticipate yet what they're going to be. The second is that we need a fundamental change in our economy and how organizations in our economy work. Incremental change, trying to improve things within the current system, within the current ways of doing things, is no longer enough. And the third belief is that there isn't one part of the economy, one sector, either the social enterprise world, business, charities, government, that has all the answers. All organizations, in our opinion, need to change, and we need to learn the best parts from all ways of working if we're going to make the change happen that we want. Now, at the time when On Purpose launched at the very beginning of 2010, I would say that our model for learning was maybe not 100% unique, but certainly very distinctive. And there were two important things about it. The first was that people were paid to learn. And the second was that we had a financially sustainable business model. And I just want to talk you through the nuts and bolts of how that works briefly. The leadership program has the following elements. Our associates, that's what we call the participants who are shown here by the people with the Superman cape, they apply to the program. It's competitive to get in. Only about 10% of people who apply get onto the program. And if they get on, they quit their job and they come to us for 1 year full time. And during that year, we organize a series of things for them. The first is 2 6-month placements, as we call them, in a variety of organizations. This could be anything from a big corporate. We work, for example, with one of the biggest banks in the UK, through to small charities, startup social enterprises, social investors, the whole spectrum. But the common factor of all these placements, of all these projects, is that they are trying to integrate social and commercial ways of working, or environmental and commercial ways of working, in more intelligent ways. The second part is that every Friday afternoon we get together face to face and we have classroom learning. We cover a range of broad topics. I'll come to those in a bit more detail later. And much of that is actually provided by a network of volunteers that we have, who generously give of their time and their experience and their expertise. Then each associate also has one-to-one mentoring and one-to-one coaching, which we organize for them again, provided by a network of highly experienced and skilled volunteers that we have access to. And last, but by no means least, the associate is part of a cohort of normally about 20 people who provide for them a peer learning community, a bunch of people who are going through this quite intensive year with them together, and with whom and from whom they can learn lots. And not only is that community the cohort they do the program with, but of course also all the alumni who have gone before them and the people who will come after them on the program as well. Now, the business model works like this. The associates are paid by the organizations they work in, but because we are providing this leadership program for them around about their placements, they are willing to accept a low salary. In London, for example, this is something called the London Living Wage, which is a kind of ethical minimum wage that they are paid. So they are paid by the organizations they work in. The organizations get high quality work, high quality people, because we are a selective program. And that allows us to charge the organizations, not the people. We charge the placement organizations a fee on top of the salary. And that funds our work on the leadership program, the selection of the people, organizing the training, and so on and so forth. And so that then closes the loop of the business model, so that associates are paid, and we are able to run this as a non-profit social enterprise which generates its own revenues. Now, this model, both the leadership model and the business model, has stayed more or less the same. Pretty very minor changes only really since the beginning. But in the 16 years that we've been running it, there are, I would say, different ages that we have been through with On Purpose, where our way of thinking about the world, our way of thinking about how to develop people who are going to transform the economy has changed. And I'm going to step through these 4 ages one by one and try and give you a flavor of each of them, why it happened, what was going on, what was our focus in terms of learning, what kind of people and what kind of organizations did we work with. Now, the first I would call the age of harnessing social enterprise. Now, back in 2010, when we started, social enterprise was all the rage. There was a lot of talk about it in the UK as well. There was a lot of political support from both sides of Parliament, from the Labour Party and from the Conservative Party. And there was a lot of investment going into social entrepreneurs, into startups, and into social investment. Interestingly, we had a slightly different view. We felt that there were actually enough social entrepreneurs around. What was missing, we felt, was people who could help scale social enterprises or help transform existing, maybe more commercial, or for that matter, charity organizations into a more social enterprise way of operating. And that was, we felt, a different kind of person who was also trying often to change their careers and find more meaningful ways of working. So our intention in this first age, if you like, was to develop these bilingual people that I had discussed with Christine Lloyd, who could help not just start up social enterprises or social enterprise type organizations, but who could scale and transform larger organizations that were already out there as well. And in terms of the content that we covered in this period in our program, we had a lot of things that you would expect, professional skills, personal development, a lot of topics that you might have on an MBA, like finance, marketing, strategy. But importantly, we also had those topics that you would not learn on an MBA. So business models or legal structures for social enterprises, impact measurement, social investment, how to scale social enterprises and equivalent organizations. And this kind of content came in useful, of course, directly in the placement organizations that our associates are working with. So I'll just describe one of them to you here. This is at the bottom, you can see Candice Motran, who was one of our very first associates in the very first cohort, which was small. It was only 5 people. And she did one of her placements at HCT Group. Now, HCT Group was at the time one of the biggest social enterprises in the UK. It was a community transport organization, and amongst other things, actually ran some of the big London bus routes, the red buses that I'm sure you are familiar with seeing pictures of in London. HCT Group had just been the recipient of a very innovative form of social investment. And of course, their investors wanted to be able to measure the impact they were going to have. But HCT Group did not have a framework for measuring its impact. So in the 6 months that Candice was there, she put together a framework for how HCT Group would measure its impact. And I believe actually that this particular framework went on to win an award later on from Social Enterprise UK. And it became for us a little bit of blueprint for quite a lot of placement organizations that had a similar need around being able to measure their impact. I lost count of the number of associates who came over the next few years, who I sent back to Candice to say, go and find out how Candice did it, go and learn from what Candice did, and apply that to the organizations that you're working in now. So this was for us, I guess, the age of harnessing social enterprise. But after a while, we hit what I sometimes call peak social enterprise, at least peak social enterprise in the terms of the kind of public awareness of it and maybe the publicity that it was getting. And the narrative moved on, I felt, and became more about, well, actually, maybe the hopes around social enterprise being able to grow big enough to challenge the corporate world are not going to happen, or not going to happen as quickly as we thought. And the narrative became more about, well, capitalism is broken, and what can we do about that? And this is one book I think I read around about this time by Hajun Chang, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I very much enjoyed the book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. And I noticed that the narrative, however, was a lot about what was not working, but there was a lot less narrative about, well, what is working and what do we need to change to make a difference happen? And this kind of started, I think, ushering in a little bit of a second age in On Purpose. Because one of the things that the outside world started talking about a lot was how maybe we could fix capitalism by thinking differently about the purpose of business. Now, purpose, of course, was in our name. It was something that we had a lot to say about, and I'll come to that in a minute. But around about the same time, I think we were realizing that social enterprise language that we were using was actually somewhat constraining to us as well. We still describe ourselves as a social enterprise and that we operate in a social enterprise way, and we are very proud of that. But in terms of our mission and what we were trying to achieve, I often find myself saying we are developing leaders for social enterprise. But of course, I don't mean literally the type of organization that is a social enterprise. What I am talking about is a philosophy of trying to be more holistic and more imaginative about integrating social, commercial, and environmental ways of working. So we started realizing that maybe we needed to and wanted to change our language as well. In the meantime, the debate around purpose was moving on. For decades, we'd been adhering to I guess, Milton Friedman's idea, which he wrote up in his famous 1970 New York Times article, where he said that the purpose of a business is to maximize profits for shareholders. It became known as the shareholder primacy doctrine. But in the kind of mid 2000 teens, 2015 onwards, there was a lot of conversation about the fact that this maybe wasn't really working anymore. And by 2019, the US Business Roundtable, which is a kind of an association of about 180 of the top CEOs of the biggest US corporations, came out with an amazing statement, which was that actually we don't believe in shareholder primacy anymore. We now say that the value or the purpose of business is to create value for all stakeholders. And shortly afterwards, Colin Mayer, a professor at Oxford Said Business School, wrote a report for the British Academy where he defined and his team defined purpose as being for business as being to solve human and environmental problems in a profitable way. Now, this was obviously already a lot of progress and a lot of change in the world of purpose. But to my mind, it still felt that this was still playing within the kind of constraints of the legacy paradigm, the legacy way of thinking about business and about our economy that we actually needed to break out from. Now, I had read around about this time another book, which you may well be familiar with, called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And there was a half a sentence in that book which really caught my attention. And basically, he was saying that organizations in our economy behave like cancer behaves in our bodies. And maybe it's because before going into management consulting, I'd done some research into cancer, but that phrase caught my imagination. And so I started thinking about, well, if that's the case, then we could actually describe our economy as being unhealthy in some way. And I was very lucky at the time that I was able to go on a sabbatical to the London School of Economics for a few months and do a lot of my own kind of research. And I was interested at that time in systems thinking and understanding how complex systems operate. And I came across a way of thinking about systems and a way of describing healthy systems, which was fascinating to me because of this idea that maybe our economy is unhealthy. Also, what do healthy systems look like instead? And essentially, system scientists have identified that if you look at, any healthy system, which are most natural systems, but also, some human-made systems, systems that endure for a long time, that are healthy and are able to carry on going, then we can identify a certain set of universal characteristics of how these healthy systems behave. And over the years, I have synthesized a lot of this thinking, which I've read about, a lot of these ideas around healthy systems, into 4 very high-level behaviors of healthy systems. There is a lot of detail under this, but I just want to give you a flavor. I'm going to talk you through these 4 behaviors of healthy systems and use actually as an analogy our human bodies, because I think it's sometimes a bit easier to think about the complex system of our human bodies, which we are quite familiar with because we live in them every day, rather than the very big complex system of our economy. And both are complex systems, so there is, it's justifiable to use one as an analogy for the other. So first of all, in healthy systems, we tend to observe universal circulation. Resources get actively circulated to all parts of the system. In our human bodies, for example, we have 37 trillion human cells, trillion with a T, that is. Our body goes to great lengths to make sure that every single one of those cells gets the resources it needs. Everyone has, for example, a blood supply. The body doesn't go, well, I'm just going to supply the top 20% of cells with blood, and then I'm going to rely on some kind of trickle-down effect. That's not how it works. It has an incredibly intricate and complicated way of getting resources to every single cell. Now, I will let you think about, do we do the same in our economy? do we do the same in our organizations as well or not? Secondly, healthy systems actively self-regulate. Our human cells in our bodies are subject to a very strict regime of regulation. They can't just grow or divide or multiply whenever they want. They can only do so under very controlled circumstances. In fact, if cells do start growing out of control, that is exactly what we call cancer, as Frederick Laloux pointed out, and which is, of course, something that in our bodies we think is a very bad idea. Interestingly, when things grow out of control in our economy, we tend to think of that as a good thing. The third behavior of healthy systems that I want to highlight is constant regeneration. Healthy systems are always learning, they are always adapting so that they don't fall out of step with their environment. And they are always investing in things today which will help them operate tomorrow, in 10 years' time, in 50 years' time, or 100 years' time. So in our bodies, for example, our human cells are literally being replaced all the time. Our body is constantly investing in creating new human cells, whether it's our skin, our hair, our muscle, our bones. There are only very, very few cells in our bodies that do not get replaced on a fairly constant basis. And then lastly, and importantly, in healthy systems, we observe that the parts of the system, the individual elements, balance their own interests with the interests of the whole system. So again, in our human bodies, a human cell doesn't just maximize its own well-being or growth or whatever it is. It performs a role which contributes to keeping the whole body healthy. It has somehow some way of knowing what it needs to do. It has an awareness of the greater whole of which it is a part. Now, you see, I think that understanding these healthy behaviors, and these are healthy behaviors that operate across in all parts of the world. You know, the human economy and human organizations, by and large, do not conform to these, but they are the exception. You know, all the rest of the world behaves in healthy ways. So this, for me, gives a kind of an interesting idea, which is what if we defined the purpose of organizations in terms of these healthy behaviors? And if we said that for every type of organization, not just businesses, but for every organization, their purpose is actually to contribute to the health of the systems of which they are a part. And every organization, of course, is part of many systems. You might be part of your local community, you are part of your industry or maybe your sector, you are part probably of a national economy or multiple national economies, and ultimately of society, and of course, then ultimately nature as well. And every organization should be thinking, am I contributing positively to the health of these various systems? And now that we have a description of what that health looks like and lots of detail below those behaviors as well, we can actually think in much more challenging ways about whether we are doing this or not. This kind of approach to purpose, to me, feels much more disruptive. It feels possible that this could lead us to a genuinely different way of thinking about our economy and the organizations that are inside it. So if I was to summarize the second age of redefining purpose for our organization, the public discourse was about, capitalism. We need to kind of fix it somehow. We had realized that the social enterprise language was starting to be a bit too constraining for us, and we were wanting to operate on a bigger stage, if you like. And we were now trying to develop people with a deeper understanding of what disruptive purpose could really be. And we were looking at things in our training like, where did ideas of purpose in companies come from, the history of CSR, sustainability, but also definitions of purpose, healthy systems, and what does that mean in practice? And to give you an example from here, this is Scott Drummond, who again was one of our associates, and he went to work for BLab UK in the early days of BLab UK. That is the organization behind the B Corp movement, which I assume is also present in South Korea, who, of course, were starting to think as well about, well, what is the purpose of organizations? How can we create an accreditation for that maybe moves us in better directions? And as always, the external environment moves on as well. And even though there was this conversation and discussion about purpose, we would say maybe it was not disruptive enough, but it was happening. But nevertheless, the problems kept on growing. Just as an example here, I'm sure you have seen the diagrams on planetary boundaries from the Stockholm Resilience Institute. Here's the plot from 2009 to the present day. These problems were not getting any smaller. To the contrary, they kept on growing. So they were getting bigger and bigger. And for many people, people started turning to the idea then of, okay, we've got big problems, we need big solutions, we need big change. And for many people, rightly or wrongly, this meant systems change. And people started thinking about systems change, picking up ideas like this idea from Donella Meadows around how to intervene in the system, what are the different leverage points that we can have. And they started talking and thinking a lot about, okay, how do we create change in the big systems, not just in an organization, but in industries, in sectors, in our economy as a whole. And for us as well, this, I think, went hand in hand with a new age on purpose. We started talking about how do we transform the economy. So the external discourse was about we need big change, we need systems change, we need systemic change. Our feeling was that the debate around purpose had not gone far enough. That we were still really talking about change within the old system and we needed to do more. And in that sense, we were excited by the idea that people were talking about systems thinking and systems change. But one thing we noticed soon was that not all systems change is created equal. Let me tell you about two different companies, one of which I'm sure you've heard of, Uber. Uber has created systems change. It has disrupted the market of individual transport with taxis. It has literally connected the system differently. I used to have to call up a taxi company to order a cab. I can now talk directly to the taxi driver. That is literally systems change because the relationships between the different players in the industry have changed. And I would say that the reason Uber is doing this primarily is still to maximize their profits and to grow as much as they can and to make money for their shareholders. So although they have created a measure of systems change or a type of systems change in their industry, they are actually, I would still doing it without having changed the underlying reasons for doing it, the underlying values and beliefs that they hold about what it is to be an organization or a business. Now, by contrast, I'd like to tell you about BlaBlaCar. BlaBlaCar is a French, also multinational organization, also profit-making. It also actually, interestingly, works in the kind of individual transport space. And it is essentially a marketplace for ride sharing. You can advertise that you are driving from A to B and someone else can say, I need a lift to that. And you can find yourself on the platform and make that happen. It's also a significant company. It has 26 million active users in Europe and South America. And it's trying to, it is a commercial company trying to make profits. But here's the important thing. I believe they are genuinely trying to do it because they are wanting to contribute to making the transport system healthier. They want to create sustainable solutions and contribute to finding a way of transporting people in a way, yeah, that works, that will be sustainable, regenerative, and healthy. So what does this mean? What is the difference? The difference between these two organizations, I would say, is that they are operating in two different paradigms. And by paradigms, I mean the worldview, the values and beliefs that you hold about, for example, our economy, about organizations, how the world works. And we are all coming out of a legacy paradigm that was essentially mechanistic, it was essentially linear, and that, as we have seen, has led us to an unhealthy economy that is working in ways that, if we continue much longer, is not going to lead to a great outcome. And we need to transition to a healthy paradigm, one that is probably more inspired by the healthy systems than maybe the natural systems that we can see outside, out there. And that needs to happen at all levels, at the level of the individual, at the level of the organization, and at the level of the economy as a whole. So this became for us in this third age a big focus. How can we help people be catalysts for organizations starting to operate in a different paradigm? And one of the things that we became very interested in is to find examples of organizations that are already operating in very different ways. Interestingly, there are hundreds and thousands of these organizations out there already, but we are often not very well primed to see them or to recognize them. We don't talk about them very much because in our old paradigm, we are primed to see and talk about whatever makes the most money, not whatever works in the most sustainable or regenerative or healthy way. So I'd like to tell you about one of the examples that we talk about with our associates often. It's called Vitsu. You may probably not have heard of it, but it is a high-end global furniture design and manufacturing company that is very well known in its space. It was founded in 1959 in Germany. Today it is headquartered in the UK. And one of the things it's best known for is selling these, you can see they're quite designerish kind of office shelving units where I can put up these units, I can arrange the shelves in whatever way I want, I can change them around when I want. And that is, I think, the thing it's probably best known for. Now, Vitsu's mission, if you like, and I will paraphrase it, but it goes something like this, which is it's trying to help as many people as possible live better lives with as little as possible. So they are deliberately trying to sell each customer the minimal amount of stuff that they can. Now, we might say, well, yeah, I know lots of companies who say that, but I think Vitsu really does some extraordinary things around this. For starters, Vitsu's furniture is backwards compatible to 1959 when they originally started up. So if you bought in 1959 one of these shelving units and one of your shelves breaks and you want to just replace a single shelf, you can go into the shop, buy a shelf today, and it will fit in your old shelving unit so that you don't have to throw away everything, you just have to replace one part. Now I thought, well, that makes sense. That seems very rational. And then I talked to a designer who told me, no, this is extremely difficult. It's extraordinary that they have been able to make this happen. This is very unusual. Secondly, they don't use any glue in their products because if you glue two things together and one of them breaks, you have to replace both. And they want to make sure that you only have to replace one of them. They don't incentivize any of their salespeople on volume. They never discount what they are selling because they don't want you to just buy something just because it's cheap. And maybe most interestingly of all, or most curiously of all, if you buy, for example, one of these shelving units from them and a few years later you move house, they desperately don't want you to throw what you bought away. So they will come to your house, they will take down the shelves, and they will put it up in your new house for free. just to make sure that it still gets used and doesn't get thrown away by either you or maybe the next person moving into your house. Now, I think if you were a classically trained, let's say, MBA student, you would look at that and go, that is crazy. That organization should not be able to compete. It shouldn't be able to survive. And yet it's been going for, what is it, 65 years now. It sells globally. It's highly respected. It is successful. These are the types of organizations that I mean when I say I think they operate with a different paradigm. They operate in a way, often just in one way, where if you are a traditional person, business person, you would say, that doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then to me, it's exciting. So if I was to summarize the third age of transforming the economy, everyone is talking about needing systems change. We felt that what had been going so far, definitions of purpose, for example, didn't go far enough because it wasn't really the new ideas of purpose were not rooted in a genuinely different paradigm. And we had an alternative around these healthy systems, which we thought was. So what we were trying to do at the time was to genuinely develop people who can envisage a qualitatively different future. I think if you want to work towards something, you have to be able to imagine that something else is possible. And hence the examples that we collected, like Vitsu and so on. The types of content that we were talking about were systems thinking. We talk about alternative economics, such as donut economics, and systems change models like Three Horizons model or the Berkana two-loop model. And here's an example of an organization and one of our associates that falls into this category, I would say. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the UK is very well known for pioneering circular economy approaches and helping businesses transform their business models. And Joe Murphy, who you can see here, was an associate who worked with us at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, stayed on, and is now their head of strategy and innovation. And of course, the external world keeps on changing. It doesn't stand still. So now I would say we are in a period of being disrupted, not just by this gentleman and his views on climate change, also his views maybe on tariffs and trade, but also, of course, by technology. So we are now entering or going into and starting to think about our fourth age of on purpose, which we are calling, or which I call, navigating disruption. The public discourse is about disruption from technology, polarization, politics, and so on. I would say that systems thinking has not helped us make the systems change happen in the way we need to. Interestingly, by the way, this is, I think, because people have taken on board systems thinking, but are then often using it in linear ways. So they are treating systems as linear, complicated problems and are trying to engineer solutions, which is not always appropriate and doesn't lead to the outcomes we want. A second frustration, by the way, which we had and we became very aware of through feedback from our associates in our program, is that they said, well, we love all this thinking around paradigm changes and healthy systems. That's what we want to help bring about. And I don't yet know what I need to do differently. What do I need to do differently tomorrow in my placement? Or when I leave the program, how do I need to operate? So that was a challenge to us. How can we make these things more practical and more applied? Now, one of the things that we started to realize is, of course, that the behaviors of healthy systems that we have identified and that we want to work towards and that we think we need to help our economy change towards are behaviors of complex systems. And complex systems work in very different ways from linear or complicated systems. And most of our legacy, traditional ways of managing organizations are actually appropriate for linear or complicated situations, not for complex ones. So what has often been happening is that we have been using the wrong type of approach, the linear approach, which, to give you a very quick thumbnail, most linear approaches take roughly the current form. It's about analyzing the current state, knowing what the current situation is, defining in quite some detail what the future state is that we want to move to, and then planning a set of steps to get from A to B. This is basically engineering a solution, which is deeply ingrained in us through our legacy paradigm, through how we are educated, through how organizations and management have been taught and learnt for many decades. But actually, if you want to create the kind of outcomes that healthy systems have and the behaviors that healthy systems have that we've seen, because they are complex systems, we need to operate and try and make change happen in ways that are coherent with how complex systems actually work. And so this is a very short introduction to a framework that we are using now, and we are trying to apply it instead of the more traditional linear approaches to leadership. It's come to us from a small consultancy we've been working with for the last year called The Adjacent. And it basically says that, rather than trying to engineer a solution, what we need to do is develop conditions for our system or our organization or our economy, for that matter, to evolve in the direction we want. And to do that, there are 3 activities that you can undertake. They're not necessarily sequential. They can happen in a loop. The first is that you need to set a direction that you want to head in. You need to know where you're trying to go. You can't describe it in detail in a complex system, but you need to know roughly where you're heading. The second is that you need to understand your system as best possible. Let's say we use a natural analogy that your system, your organization is a forest. You need to know roughly what are the elements of that forest, what happens, does it behave differently at different times of year? A forest in winter is different from a forest in summer, for example. You will never be able to describe the system in all its detail. That is not only practically impossible, but actually theoretically impossible too. But you can learn a lot about how it functions. And once you have a direction and you know enough about how your system functions, then you can think about probing what we call adjacent opportunities. Or in other words, you can run little and safe to fail experiments that you hope will move you just a little way in the right direction, in the direction that you are trying to go. And if they don't move you in the right direction, by the way, that's also okay, because you have learned more about how the system works. This is a fundamentally different way of thinking about how to make change happen and of thinking about leadership and management, not just in organizations, but in all kinds of complex systems. Now, so the 4th age for us of navigating disruption is that we're all talking about disruption, AI, politics. We have noticed that systems thinking and systems change is not getting us where we need to, and we need to be more applied, and we need to align how we work with the complex outcomes that we want to achieve. So we're trying to develop now people who can lead in complexity and genuinely help transform the economy to the healthy outcomes. We're teaching things like understanding complex systems and how they are different and why they are different. Frameworks like the Cynefin framework, which helps you understand when something is complex, complicated, or simple. And how to use probes and experiments to make change happen. And of course, some of our alumni are already far ahead of us. This is Mary Stevens, who did the program quite a while ago. And she now works at Friends of the Earth, which is a national environmental charity in the UK. And she works on creating local systems change. And she has, I think, the rather glorious job title, which is Experiments Program Manager. So she is literally taking this experimental approach to making local systems change happen. And it's even in her job title. Now, we can apply this to ourselves as well, this way of thinking. If I think about on purpose through this kind of alternative new way of making change happen, then the direction that we are heading in is that we are trying to develop people who will work towards healthy systems, healthy economy, healthy organizations. The system that we need to understand is the system of our program that we run with all the stakeholders that are attached to it. That's quite complicated. The associates, the alumni, the placement organizations that we put people in, the mentors, the coaches, the trainers, the community, and so on and so forth. And we are starting to think a little bit about the fact that every person who comes through our program is essentially an opportunity for us to learn about how to develop people who are going to transform the economy. In other words, every associate is an experiment all of their own, with whom and through whom we can learn more. Now, we have gone through, I would say, these 4 ages of on purpose: harnessing social enterprise, redefining purpose, transforming the economy, and navigating disruption. I'm sure there will be more ages to come. I'm sure our knowledge will change and we will start doing things differently again. And that is fine. I can't commit to you that we will find an answer. But the thing that I can commit to you is that we will try to keep on learning about how best to develop people who will genuinely go out and transform the economy. The other thing also that I can tell you is that I'm hugely proud of the people. You see some in the background here, and the organizations that we work with. And the people and organizations, not that we work with during the program, but what they go on to do after the program as well. They are where the learning and the important experimentation is happening. They are, I hope, the seeds that are going to contribute to the transformation that we need. Change and disruption is here already. It's happening. We're not going to be able to stop that. But what we can make sure is that we end up in a place that we want to get to, that we don't by accident end up somewhere where we don't want to be. And we have a choice about that, and we can make different futures happen if we try to do that. And what we need to do is to never stop learning together about how to evolve people and develop people who are going to make the transformation we need happen. Thank you very much.